before we get to that, I do want to ask about your transition from, just kind of common sense, eating eggs and cheese and your blood sugar doesn't rise versus eating other things your blood sugar does. How was the transition from just kind of doing that on your own informally, again, just based on common sense, to then like learning about this as an actual thing? Like, what was that process like?
I would say most of all, it was gradual. Like when I started doing all this, there wasn't a lot of information online about it, really hardly anything. And my husband and I ended up co-founding an online magazine called The Sweet Life. And it was a low carb diabetes magazine. And we started doing it basically because we were living a low carb life without much struggle and managing diabetes really well with it. And it was kind of the opposite of everything that we were being told to do by medical experts. So the drive to start A Sweet Life was really because I wanted to put information out there. Like it didn't exist. And I wanted to say, hey, like everything that you read about diabetes says that you're going to have these horrible complications and they're unavoidable and you can't stop the progression of the disease. And I was like, but if you don't eat what they tell you to eat, then you're fine. Like you don't have to have complications if your blood sugar is normal. But it's impossible to keep normal blood sugar when you're following the standard guidelines.
Yeah.
So I really just started reading it. It was very early on. There were a couple people doing Carnivore at that time. Amber O'Hearn, who was in Vegas at the conference, she was around. Like there were just a couple people. There were like two diabetes advocates talking about low carb, and I at the time didn't even understand like I said, didn't understand what keto was. Low carb to me meant like, you just have half an apple, not a whole apple. Like it was a very kind of gradual thing where I figured it out, and mostly by self-experimenting, by seeing what happened on my glucose meter after I ate different things, and learning that if I ate more carbs than I should have, that okay, I can go run up and down the stairs in my building 10 times and that's going to bring my blood sugar down. Like there was a lot of trial and error, just figuring it out. And eventually I did really just stop eating carbs. So it was over time. And it's a hard process because there was no one else doing it at the time who would say to me, oh, you're fine if you don't eat any carbs at all. So like I said in the beginning, it did turn into a ketogenic diet. And I was not, I was not a science writer when I started doing all of this, but I kind of, turned into that because I was constantly reading studies and constantly trying to understand. And one of my big questions was always like, but what do doctors understand about my body that I don't? Like what is it about the fiber that I need? Like it just didn't make sense. And it would take years before before there were enough doctors around saying, no, you really don't need any fiber, you're fine without it, that I would stop kind of stressing about it. And it would take years before I stopped worrying about LDL, because that's, everyone says, oh, your LDL goes up on keto, it's dangerous. And I'd be like, well, what's more dangerous, the LDL or the high blood sugar? Because that's the choice. So.
Yeah. And the conference that we were at in Las Vegas largely centered around the question of cholesterol and lean mass hyperresponders. And you are one, is that correct? Do you fit the trifecta?
I do, though not as extreme as others. Like my husband's much more extreme. He's had I don't know, 500. Like he's had really high cholesterol. Yeah. Mine is usually 200 to 300, that range, total cholesterol. Yeah.
Gotcha. It's interesting, this phenotype, like as I was traveling down to the conference, for example, I stopped to grab a bite to eat and, struck up a conversation with strangers. And oftentimes if I say like I'm going to a nutrition conference or I'm going to like a ketogenic conference, I get crickets afterwards. But this one, to be able to say like, I'm going to a conference where we're exploring an idea where people are curing chronic diseases, but their cholesterol goes way, way up, like higher than you would ever
Hmm.
imagine. And people are like, wait, what? Like, oh, that's so interesting. I had high cholesterol and I didn't think it was a problem. Why did my doctor prescribe a statin? Like it started conversations. It was really interesting.
It is, and the whole statin conversation is really interesting because even, even in our low carb world, there are doctors who still believe in statins. And for me, the question has always been, well, if statins lead to insulin resistance, then why are they good for your heart? Like,
Great
if
point.
that, it just doesn't make sense. And I've probably spoken to thousands of people with diabetes over all the years that I was writing about it. And it was very easy to see that when people would, without diabetes, even before, would get put on a statin. And then within, I don't know, 6 months or a year, they're suddenly have pre-diabetes, diabetes, and and then they start getting diabetes medication. And so I would wonder, is it the statin? Because the data is there. I mean, this is stuff I was reporting on in, like, I don't know, 2011. Like it's not something new. So so yeah, it's very confusing for people, and it's probably, like, I don't know. I'm not a cardiologist. I'm not an expert. I don't take a statin. So
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's interesting as we're relating this to people and saying, like, what would you do if you
mhm,
cured your bipolar, but now you have high cholesterol?
right.
Which one do you want to choose? I think people can relate to that idea a little bit more. And if I'm remembering your story correctly, another challenge that you had is, weren't you a vegetarian or even a vegan for a large portion of your life?
Yes, I stopped eating meat when I was 10, and because I didn't want to eat animals, I didn't want to harm animals, and I still feel that way. Um, Turning into a meat eater was extremely difficult for me. It's still difficult for me. Um, I stopped eating meat when I was 10, and when I was 11, I started getting severe migraine headaches, which plagued me for until I was pregnant. Um, you know, many, many years later, when I started really paying attention to nutrition for the first time. I still wasn't getting it right, but I was conscious that I needed to eat, that I needed to get certain nutrients in order to have a healthy baby. Um, yeah, I was very low energy. Um, and it was after my husband went on a carnivore diet and reversed all kinds of awful symptoms, that I was like, I had already done the research. Like I was, you know, kind of rationally, I knew that meat would be good for me. And I had been especially reading a lot about dietary fat and how the brain really does need animal fat. Um, and I had suffered from anxiety pretty much my whole life. And it was just something I lived with, and it didn't stop me from functioning or doing the things I needed to do in life, but it certainly dramatically reduced my quality of life, and I suffered tremendously, pretty much all the time. And then, at the same time, like, I didn't want to eat meat, and it grossed me out. And so it was just something I was grappling with, to both kind of have the knowledge that it works and to see more and more people healing on carnivore and see it right in front of my eyes with my husband. I mean, right in front of my eyes, he had so many autoimmune symptoms. I mean, he didn't have diagnosed rheumatoid arthritis, but he almost surely had it. IBS, or some kind of colitis. He almost surely had it. And we know he has type 1 diabetes. We knew he had the autoimmune tendency. So it was just really fast that these things went away. And then when I finally started eating meat, I used just beef tallow to start, because that's what I had researched, and I was like, okay, what I need is bone marrow and beef tallow. So bone marrow was too much for me to start with. And then the tallow just looked like coconut oil, right? So I just started cooking veggies in that rather than olive oil or coconut oil. And within a few weeks, I felt a change in my brain. Like it was pretty powerful. And I told Dr. Mariella Glant, who's been on your show also. She's a keto endocrinologist and the founder of Ona Health, which is like similar to Virta Health, which you can treat diabetes with the keto diet. So I told her, said, about a few weeks in, we were talking on the phone, and she's a good friend of mine. I said, I think this is what happy feels like. It was really that dramatic, the change of getting, and I sort of, since then, I really think of all the anxiety symptoms as the brain screaming for fat. Like that anxiety is the physical manifestation of a malnourished brain. And it kind of makes sense, you know, it's like, where's the food? Where's what I need? And as soon as it got it, fine, calm down. It's not that anxiety goes away completely. It doesn't, but it just becomes something that you can say, okay, this exists, but I have my brain can deal with it. It doesn't control any part of me.
Well said. Yeah, no, that was about 2 weeks into my carnivore journey that
Oh,
I
wow.
noticed that same thing. I didn't think I had anxiety, but when you get to the other side of like, you're just okay. Like stressful things happen around you and they just like, it's like you described and said so well, they just don't impact you as much as they used to, or you can problem solve or think about solutions in such a different way. That's what surprised me. And that 2 week transition is like, that's the time you're having digestive issues. It's not the most comfortable, but like that was enough to keep me on. And that was 5.5 years ago. And it was interesting. A client that I was working with yesterday is kind of on this path. She's not all the way carnivore, but she's had some autoimmunity that's getting a lot better. Her body's feeling better. She's down to 2 meals a day. And she was just saying, like, I feel really good. This is amazing. Like, I'm thinking clearly. My brain fog is gone. I don't need naps. Like all those things that we know. And I pointed out to her, like, isn't it so sad that probably 99% of people that you see out there will never feel what you feel because they're not in the proper state. They're eating the wrong foods and running the metabolism incorrectly. They'll never feel what it feels like to feel what you're describing right now. So sad.
Yeah. I mean, it's the sadness, I guess, like for me, it manifests also as this like deep frustration, this feeling of like, it's not fair that people don't know this, that our medical system is not accepting that there are ways to heal with nutrition. Like and that's why I'm so passionate about changing the USDA's dietary guidelines, because if we don't do that, we're going to continue to feed people, I mean, the same things. That these guidelines are basically, you know, our school lunches have to follow them, hospitals, the military, prisons, like everybody's under these guidelines. And so they, every 5 years, they update them. And the next update is 2025. And I really felt a strong need to oppose them. You know, I am aware that nothing I do is probably going to change them, but I don't want to let it slide without calling it out. You know, it's and Nina Teichels has been working on this for a decade, and her work is phenomenal. You know, she wrote Big Fat Surprise. She founded the Nutrition Coalition, and she has presented all of the facts and all of the science to the USDA, and they know that alternatives exist, essential alternatives, and nothing's happened.
Yeah.